This is Nobody Cares. I've decided to document my own journey through the criminal justice system. And this is not me whining. I didn't whine then, and I'm not whining now. It's 40 years later. All the charges that I faced were conspiracy charges. There was no substantive charge at all, meaning that I was not caught actually doing anything. There were no drugs seized from me. And all the evidence they had is wiretap conversations, period. That's all they had. The Canadian charges, the ones in Saskatoon, was conspiracy to possess and distribute 5 liters of hash oil. And now, all these years later, I'm not going to be able to remember the exact process that the police have to go through in order to obtain a warrant to tap a phone. But there's a lot to it. And the RCMP keep a lawyer on retainer to help them do these warrants when it's like a search warrant, and you make the application to a judge, and there's really a lot that goes into it. And so they retain a lawyer to make sure that hopefully that everything is done correctly and that they can't be reversed on this later on. When my lawyer saw the information that had been used to obtain a warrant to tap all these phones, including 3 payphones, he was really quite appalled. He said, there's big problems here. It's really a mess. And he recommended to me that we hire another lawyer, somebody that he knew who was an expert on wiretap evidence and who had been retained by the RCMP on a 2-year contract at some point in his past to do this sort of work for the RCMP. When he saw this evidence, he was just beside himself. He was more than appalled. He could not believe how incompetent and how bad it was. And we brought him into court, and he took over that portion of the defense. It was actually a voir dire, a court within a court, to see whether this evidence was actually going to be allowed. Well, it's the only evidence they had. They needed it to be in there. And he did a terrific job. He ripped them to shreds. And they really had very, very little rebuttal, nothing to explain why they were as bad as they were. The judge ruled against me. Judge Sidney Walker, Court of Queen's Bench, Saskatoon Superior Court. And I will never forget his words, and I'm going to give them to you exactly as he spoke them, okay? He said, "Illegally obtained evidence has always been permissible in my courtroom. Proceed." And with that, I was, of course, found guilty and sentenced to 1 year in jail and a $5,000 fine or 6 months in default of that fine. Now, he knows he's going to be reversed on appeal. Obviously, I mean, he makes the statement himself right in open court that the evidence is illegal. And so he refuses to grant me bail pending my appeal. My lawyer told me that it would be at least a year to prepare everything and then to actually get a date with the appeal court. And there isn't a goddamn thing you can do about it. My trial down in the United States is essentially the same thing. No wiretaps, no trial. But there were significant differences. It didn't matter how bad the warrants were, because you can't challenge Canadian law in an American courtroom. And so there was no argument to be made as far as the warrants went. They would still have to, prove that it's my voice, and there's procedures, and so all of that would still have to be done. But what my lawyer did was challenge the admissibility of the wiretaps. The challenge being whether evidence obtained outside the borders of the United States was admissible, and under what grounds would it be admissible. The only case law that they could find, that my lawyer could find, that was relevant to my case, and it's just so ironic because I remember this case, and it occurred in Calgary, Edmonton, Saskatoon, and Regina. And it concerned a company called Royal American Shows. They were based in Florida, and they did the summer exhibition circuit. Okay, they did the midway, and the rides, I guess mainly the rides is what they would do. And they had the contract for Calgary Stampede, Klondike Days in Edmonton, Prairieland Exhibition in Saskatoon, and Buffalo Days in Regina. And back in those days, everything was cash. And the Americans, and I guess it was the Internal Revenue government, I'm not exactly sure, Internal Revenue probably, was thought that there was undeclared income, and this was an income tax case. Now, I don't know how this cooperation works between countries like that, Canada, United States, and this country, where the police in in this case, Canada, does all the investigative work, and then for a foreign government. But anyway, that's what happened. There was surveillance, there was wiretap surveillance, and eventually they raided Royal American Shows. I've forgotten what city that happened in. And they seized documents and found a bunch of handguns. Of course, Americans, they can't be without their handguns. And it was the handguns that led to the Canadian charges. What happened with the charges in Canada, I've forgotten, but it's completely irrelevant anyway. It's what happened in the States that matters. And down there, Royal American Shows fought the charges, these income tax evasion charges. And now, I don't remember exactly how this happened, whether it was a voir dire that got appealed or they lost the trial and they appealed that. But anyway, the admissibility of wiretap evidence obtained outside the United States was appealed to, and the appeal court heard the case, and they ruled that it was admissible in an American court, but not until it was considered to be a final document, meaning that it was no longer appealable in the country of origin. The judge in my case listened to this and then ruled against me. And so the wiretap conversations were going to be allowed at my trial. But my lawyer wasn't done. He had saved his ace, and now was the time to play it. In the United States, you have the unassailable right, the unquestioned right, to face your accuser and cross-examine him in court. At my preliminary hearing before my trial in Saskatoon, the RCMP admitted that they had a confidential informant, and that the information that that informant had given to the RCMP was the basis of their application to get before a judge to get a warrant to tap the phones. In Canada, you do not have the right, an accused does not have the right to cross-examine a confidential informant. And his information is just accepted as being honest and truthful. This is bad law and should not be allowed. Everyone should have the right to cross-examine a person giving testimony against you. And in the United States, you do have that right. And like I've already stated, I'm going to be repeating myself here, it's an unquestioned right. When my lawyer made this application in court, or made the statement that we wanted this right, to exercise this right, all hell broke loose. Maybe I'm kind of overstating that a little bit, but the prosecution jumped up and started objecting and asked for an adjournment, saying they weren't ready to argue this and they needed the rest of the day. And that adjournment was granted. What happened next is one for the ages. The next day, when we got to court, the courtroom was packed with RCMP who had flown in overnight in the RCMP jet from Ottawa all the way to Great Falls, Montana. That jet holds 25 people. Included in that group was the deputy commissioner of the RCMP, and they literally packed that side of the courtroom, the prosecution side of the courtroom. Nobody on my side, and all these people literally packed that side of the courtroom. All of them there, obviously to support the district attorney's argument that they should not have to produce their confidential informant. My lawyer made his arguments, the district attorney made his argument, and the right that any American citizen would have in that courtroom was denied me. The judge ruled against me. This move by the RCMP is pretty much unprecedented. I doubt it's ever happened before or that it's ever happened since. And I could get really snarky here and say a lot of snarky things, like what a pretty penny that must have cost the taxpayers of Canada. You can just imagine. But I'm not going to do that. Instead, I just want to reiterate, and it just seems like just such common sense, and should be common sense to everybody, that you should have the right to cross-examine your accuser. These rights that I'm talking about are not put in place to protect the guilty. They are put in place to protect the innocent. And the more that the police get away with stuff like this, the better. There's just emboldens them. And they're just going to continue and go on with it. And at some point, an innocent man is going to be a victim. So my trial continued. It wasn't a long trial, just a few days, really. I forget, actually, now. And the judge sentenced me to 10 years and 3 years probation. And we'd find out later that he'd actually sentenced me incorrectly. There are guidelines down there laid out by the government for specific offenses, amount of drugs that were supposedly involved. And according to those guidelines, my sentence should have been 6 years. He then released me, pending my appeal, but it was more than just my appeal. There was more to it than that. There was an agreement between the defense and the prosecution that I'd be allowed to go back to Canada to deal with the Canadian charges and get that out of the way at the same time. Now, I would go on to lose my appeal, although that's not quite correct because the appeal court just simply refused to hear it. They did not ask for oral argument and just denied my appeal outright, saying that the conviction could stand. The appeal court has no obligation to hear my case or any case. Nobody enjoys that. It's not a right that you enjoy. It is simply up to their discretion. Presumably, in my case, they would just simply go, well, it's just another drug case. Who cares? We don't care. He's been convicted. That's good enough. Conviction stands. And it makes me think about Leonard Pelchat's case, which is essentially the same thing. And there's absolutely no comparison between my case and Leonard's case. It's just I'm passionate about it. And there were multiple attempts made to get a new trial for Leonard. And each time, with all the bad evidence and everything, the appeal court would just simply say, he's been convicted by a jury, the conviction stands. And there's not a damn thing you can do about it. In the United States, what they do with foreigners down there, I'm not sure all charges, but drug charges certainly, is that you serve 1/3 of your sentence and then you're deported. And that's exactly what happened. 40 months is 1/3 of 10 years. And so between Canada and the United States, I served 51 months, 17 days, every second of it. Now I'm going to take this opportunity to get some things straight here about what happened. A bunch of old hippies is all we were, and we were interested in the weed. This was the Colombian era, and it was pouring into the United States, but we had a problem sourcing that bulk wholesale price. How we came into contact with these Colombian people who were obviously they were into the powder. It's irrelevant how we ran into them, but it was always known right from the very beginning that what we were looking for was a source for Colombian weed, dockside price, the best price that we could get. And like I say, so that was known. But it was also necessary with these people to establish some goodwill, and that's what was going on there. Now, I know from the conversations that we were getting close to what we wanted. And, I don't know really how to put this, but I'm just not going to go on and on about it. The white powder was not our focus at all. And it's just very unfortunate the way things worked out. And I have to live with that, and that's fine. I do live with it. No, and I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything here, but in the early 80s in North America, things were a lot different than they are now when it comes to cocaine. Its popularity with actors and professional athletes is undeniable, and it was nothing to see these people with a gold chain around their neck and their Coke spoon attached to it. Hollywood parties were nothing if you didn't have cocaine. There'd be a big mound of cocaine on the dining room table with a glass lid over the top of it to, prevent accidents, with the wind, that sort of thing. And comedians and late night talk show hosts had a lot of fun with this topic. I have a really brief little story that I've been hoping to find a spot for, and this is as good a place as any. And it has to do with that period of time in Ronald Reagan's war on drugs. And, it was $1 billion a year. They actually budgeted $1 billion a year for this, down in Colombia with these helicopters and the army and hunting down these clandestine labs and destroying them. And Lord only knows what all they were doing. Didn't do a fucking bit of good, really. Not a drop of good came out of it. Didn't stop anything. The ironic thing about that was all that money being spent on going to the source and trying to get rid of it. And the whole time, and I believe I got this story out of High Times magazine. That's where it came from. To make cocaine, you take the leaves, and I really don't know anything about it, but I know a little bit. And you soak them there's a chemical that you soak them in, and then you make this, it forms a paste, I think, something like that. And then you take that paste and then you use other chemicals on that and cook it, or I don't really know. And that reduces it into a powder, and now you've got the saleable product that you want. And so while Ronald Reagan and they're spending this $1 billion a year on eradicating cocaine from the face of the earth, the whole time, these chemicals that are needed to produce cocaine, to transform the plant into the powder, were being legally imported from the United States. 45-gallon barrels, how many do you want? Ship them. Unreal. What you've listened to today is reality. And so try and remember that the next time that you curl up on the sofa with your mug of hot chocolate and are watching some rerun of Criminal Minds or some other cop and lawyer show with a nice warm fuzzy ending, remember, what you're watching is fantasy.